In September of 2021, Squid Game came out on Netflix and the internet lost its poop. And rightly so. It's a great story with a message that resonated well with general audiences in this turbulent moment in time. What I found particularly fascinating about Squid Game's international success, however, was the fact that North Americans like myself were actually watching a foreign language series with either subtitles or dubbing. This is definitely not the norm for most people born and raised in the US. Because many of the biggest TV series and movies are produced in our country in our native language of English, we've become very English-centric with our entertainment preferences. As a result, many people from the US or other predominantly English-speaking countries will poo-poo a movie or TV show if it means they'll have to read. And as a result, I find that many of my fellow native English speakers have unrealistic expectations of how a perfect sub or dub should be. We in the anime community have already seen debates like this unfold time and time again. So it was both interesting and cringe-inducing to see some of this bad sub versus dub discourse seep into the mainstream when someone fluent in Korean criticized a translation choice in the Squid Game subtitles, and so many people just accepted this misinformed take as gospel. Fellow translator Steiner later pointed out that the bad subtitle in question was actually a dub title, as in closed captions of the English dub. Dubs are a whole other beast entirely, and it's not at all uncommon for lines in dubs to be quote-unquote mistranslated. And check out my JoJo video later if you want to learn more about why this is. Now, since you saw the thumbnail, clicked on this video, and you're already a minute into listening to my lovely voice, you may be wondering, where exactly does Bojack Horseman fit into all of this? Bojack Horseman is a cartoon that was originally made in English. It's also been adapted, both subtitled and dubbed, into a variety of other languages, including Japanese. And since Japanese is the language I translate from, and I can understand it, I watched some Japanese Bojack Horseman out of curiosity. And with a Netflix subscription and a VPN, you can do it too! This is the part where I would segue into an ad for one of the various VPNs you hear YouTubers talk about, but I'm not big enough to have paid sponsors, so support me on Patreon! It's easy for native English speakers to criticize a sub or dub of a foreign language show for not being 100% accurate because we're simply not used to consuming subbed and dubbed media. So I thought we would do the reverse and take a look at Bojack Horseman's Japanese subs and dubs. We'll look at what's different, why it's different, and what we can learn from seeing how our native language is translated into another. Part 1. A Little Theory. Now, before I show you the clips and compare the Japanese subs and dubs to the English dialogue, I have to tell you a little about formal equivalence versus dynamic or functional equivalence. I know it sounds boring, but it's important, I promise. And I mean, I guess you could just skip to the next chapter if you're really that opposed to learning things, but you do you. A formal equivalence focuses on the form of the text. It tries to stay as close as possible to the grammatical structure of the original text. Laymen will often describe this kind of translation as literal or one-to-one. A functional equivalence, however, focuses on the function of the text. What sort of emotional response needs to be elicited in the viewer? How can we give the English-speaking viewer the same experience that the Japanese-speaking viewer had while watching this anime? You may have heard this translation style described as loose, free, or maybe you've heard it called a localization by fans or people in the industry, or a vocalization by anti-SJWs. An equivalence of form is what many anime fans think they want in their translations. It's what the Korean-speaking Twitter critic of Squid Game thought they wanted too. They believe that literal translations better preserve the true meaning, and that any deviation is a mistranslation that butchers the integrity of the original piece of art or entertainment. But any professional entertainment translator worth their salt will use equivalence of function in their translations. It's simply not enough for the viewer to understand linguistically what is being said. A lot of communication goes beyond words. It's in our culture, emotions, and the way words sound. If it's a funny line in the original language, it needs to also be funny in the translation. If the line sounds poignant or quotable in the original language, it had better sound poignant or quotable in the translation too. If the scene is sad in the original language, the translated version had better make the audience tear up. It's important to translate not only the words a character says, but that character's voice, personality, and motivation as well. Only then can one have a true equivalent experience in the translated language, or as equivalent as one can possibly get in a translation. There is no such thing as a perfect translation, by the way. Just, getting ahead of that comments section. Let me give you one quick example from Japanese Bojack Horseman to show you what I mean.
Todd clearly thinks the world of you.
Todd thinks the world of Pop-Tarts.
Now, if you compare my somewhat literal or formal translation of the Japanese subs to the original English dialogue, you'll see many differences. Todd clearly thinks the world of you was changed to he respect loves you. And just a quick note here that kei suru doesn't sound as clunky as respect love does in English, but that's what it literally means in Japanese if you break down the kanji. In the Japanese subs, none of the original English words were translated literally. This is mostly because thinks the world of is an English language idiom that, if translated literally into Japanese, sounds a bit odd and loses its emotional impact. トットにとってあなたは世界のような存在よ. And if we get down to the essence of what Diane is saying here, she's expressing that Bojack means a lot to Todd, that Todd looks up to Bojack and respects him. So it's really not at all a stretch to translate Todd clearly thinks the world of you to he respect loves you. Now look at the next two lines. The English line, Todd thinks the world of Pop-Tarts, was changed into he gay loves me. Now, on the surface, this looks like not only a blatant mistranslation, but an insertion of a homophobic agenda by putting gay into a sentence that never mentioned anything to do with gayness. Also, it's extra funny since Todd is actually asexual, but we'll get back to that in a moment. So why was Todd thinks the world of Pop-Tarts changed to he gay loves me? First, let's look at the subtext of these two lines of dialogue together. In the first line, Diane is telling Bojack that Todd thinks the world of him because she's imploring him to be nicer to Todd, stop putting him down, and maybe be a mentor to him instead. And when Bojack says Todd thinks the world of Pop-Tarts, what he's really doing here is twisting Diane's words to make an edgy joke to derail the conversation and prevent himself from getting too emotionally involved. That's kind of a huge character trait of Bojack, avoiding feeling any emotions by cracking cynical jokes. So if Bojack's motivation is to derail a serious conversation by twisting Diane's words into a mean-spirited joke about Todd, changing kei, which means to love and respect, to gay-ai, which means gay love but sounds quite similar, the Japanese subtitle ticks all the boxes. It's a play on Diane's words, it's dismissive, it mocks Todd, and it's funny. And as for making the joke about Todd homophobic when it wasn't originally so in the English version, I highly doubt this was the translator inserting a homophobic agenda or anything. In the first episode, in both English language and Japanese versions, Bojack did mention offhandedly that he thought in the past that Todd was gay.
お前の両親が違った生き方を認めないって言うから、俺はてっきりお前がゲイか何かかと思ったんだ。なのにその違った生き方って怠け者だけだろ。
Also, it's not uncommon for people on the asexual spectrum to be mistaken for gay. I'm speaking from experience here. So even though Todd is revealed later in the series to be asexual, probably of the hetero-romantic variety, Bojack's dismissive gay joke here ties in really well, even though he did not crack a gay joke in this specific line in the English language version. I want you to keep all of this in mind as we compare and contrast more clips of Bojack Horseman, because you're going to see a lot of so-called mistranslations in these Japanese subs and dubs. And just a note that for this video, I'll be using mostly formal or literal translations of the Japanese subs and dubs because it is the linguistics in this case that we will be comparing. There are also many other factors at play that cause lines to be mistranslated, and we're going to cover those as well. Part 2. Japanese subtitles are so short.
Oh, God damn it, Todd, clean up your shit.
Łukasz Dudka, a trainer in subtitling at the University of Warsaw, Poland, explained that in using eye-tracking technology, you can see how a viewer actually utilizes subtitles when watching a piece of subbed media. You might have noticed this yourself if you watch a lot of subtitled shows, but what typically happens is your eyes will jump down to read a subtitle when it's first placed on the screen, then your eyes will jump back up to the image. What this means is if the subtitle takes too long to read, either because it's worded strangely, or it's lengthy, or it's in a strange font, or placed inconsistently on the screen, you're going to miss a great portion of the actual piece of media you're supposed to be watching. This phenomenon is called subtitle blindness. Because of subtitle blindness, subtitle translators of any language pair are generally encouraged to keep their translations as short and to the point as possible. This is sometimes the source of fan disappointment in anime translations. They'll be upset that the subtitles left out honorifics, or an adjective, or reworked two sentences into one. But a lot of this is simply because the subtitles would take up too much space on the screen otherwise. And Japanese subtitlers take this to an even bigger extreme. Their subs are incredibly short and often leave out a lot of words, especially when the character is speaking quickly. Here's an excerpt from Season 4, Episode 6, Stupid Piece of Shit.
Stupid piece of shit. You're a real stupid piece of shit. But I know I'm a piece of shit. That at least makes me better than all the pieces of shit who don't know they're pieces of shit.
So this line, "but I know I'm a piece of shit, that at least makes me better than all the pieces of shit who don't know they're pieces of shit," was changed to, "but I'm self-aware, so I'm better off." What used to be 127 full-width characters, or 27 English words, was condensed to just 18 Japanese characters, or about 10 Japanese words if you count particles as words. But if you look at what each line is actually saying, the OG English line is saying, "but at least I know I'm a piece of shit," and the Japanese is basically saying the same thing. "But at least I'm self-aware that I am a piece of shit." What's missing in the Japanese sub is the humor that comes from the speed and repetition of the phrase "piece of shit" 3 whole times within the single line of dialogue. But if that had all been kept in the subtitle, it would have been way too long to even read, and the viewer would not be paying attention to any of the animation. What's most important in this scene is not the exact words Bojack is saying. It's showing how his depression manifests as a snarky, mean internal monologue. Let's look at the same excerpt but dubbed.
クソが。このクソ野郎が。クソの役にも立たねえよ。でも自覚してるってことは、少なくともクソだって自覚ないやつよりはマシかもな。
As you can see here, with dubbing, a good voice actor can fit in a lot more words than a subtitle can, and this is one of the reasons why I believe dubs are ultimately better than subs when it comes to animation. While the wording was slightly different because of how the Japanese language works, nothing was really left out in the dub. In fact, I really liked the Japanese line, "Kuso no yaku ni mo tatanee yo," which is like, "You're a sorry excuse for a piece of shit," or "You even suck at being a piece of shit." It's a nice touch, and it's really funny in Japanese. Here's Bojack sitting down to breakfast.
These are cookies. This is not breakfast. You are eating cookies. Stop it. Stop eating cookies and go make yourself breakfast. Stop it. Don't eat one more cookie. Put that cookie down. Do not eat that cookie. I can't believe you ate that cookie.
These are cookies. This is not breakfast. You are eating cookies. Stop it became, cookies are not a meal. It gets the same idea across, and if you're listening to the sound of Will Arnett's voice and looking at the animation, which you have ample time for with such a short subtitle, Bojack's depression, anxiety, and self-loathing come across just fine without the repetition that was in the original English line. And now the dub.
これはクッキーだろ。食事じゃなくてクッキーだ。やめろ。朝の食事くらい作って食え。やめろ。もう食うんじゃねえぞ。戻すんだよ。食うんじゃない。また食いやがった。
Now, since I translated these Japanese dub lines with form in mind rather than function, they don't land as well as the original English lines, but to a Japanese speaker, they sound nice and punchy and were a good equivalent to the original English, especially the sarcastic "mata kuyagatta" line at the end. Because Japanese subs have to be so much shorter, lines are reduced to their most important parts, and little things like particles, pronouns, and verb forms do a lot of the work in carrying over the tone and emotionality of the characters. And we'll talk more about how these characters' personalities and emotions are translated into Japanese later in the video. But first, I need to talk about a serious issue. Something that is the most important issue of our time, and is something that threatens to destroy Western civilization as we know it. Part 3. Censorship.
Also, if you're looking for the toaster strudels, I got really high last night and ate them all.
Oh my god, did you see that? They censored out the part where Todd got high. I can't fucking believe the translator inserted their politics into this beautiful work of art. Leave it to the Japanese to destroy Western civilization with their anti-libertarian, puritanical pot bro. Censorship in translation is a divisive issue in the anime community, and it's really frustrating trying to debunk and educate the community on what is and what isn't censorship, and how profanity actually works in Japanese and English. Not to mention the fact that most censorship in developed countries like Japan and the US is driven by profit, not by politics. Just saying. In this case, the "I got high" part being omitted was most likely due to character limitations. Note how the words "last night" were also removed from the sentence. The most important part of the sentence is that Todd ate the thing Bojack is looking for, not that Todd ate it last night or that he ate it because he got high. Todd getting high does add to his personality and it makes the line funnier, but again, since Japanese subtitles have to be so short, it made sense to leave out the I got high last night part. And fear not, if you check out the dub, the pot reference is back in. It's actually 4:20 as I record this, no joke.
あとさ、もしパイ探してるなら、夕べハイになって全部食っちゃった。
In both versions, they had to change toaster strudel to pie because culturally that would be more recognizable to Japanese people, but I think we can let that slide, even if they were being neo-colonialist by erasing German culture. I guess I feel the need to ruin the joke I just made by letting you all know that that was a joke. Anyway, here's some curse words.
Piece of shit. Stupid piece of shit. You're a real stupid piece of shit.
On the surface, it may look like the profanity was censored out of the Japanese subtitle. It's really easy to fall into that flawed way of thinking if you approach translation with form in mind rather than function. In form, English language Bojack called himself a piece of shit. In function, Bojack was dehumanizing himself in a vulgar way. In form, ningen no kuzu means human scum. In function, it's something you would say to dehumanize someone in a vulgar way, like calling someone a stupid piece of shit would do. In the next line, in form, Bojack is calling himself a stupid piece of shit, but in function, he is vulgarly insulting his own intelligence. In form, the Japanese line bakayaro literally means something along the lines of stupid cad, but in function, it's a name you would call someone if you wanted to vulgarly insult their intelligence. And if we look at the third line, you're a real stupid piece of shit, doesn't add anything new if you approach the language formally or literally. So what was the overall function of these last three lines? It was Bojack vulgarly dehumanizing himself and expressing that he's good for nothing. The function of these lines and this entire scene and episode is to show the audience what the mind of a traumatized alcoholic with depression and anxiety sounds like. This is what's most important here, not the individual words, which is why it really isn't a stretch that the Japanese subtitle for "You're a real stupid piece of shit" is "You really are good for nothing." In this context, to a Japanese audience, it really hammers home the destructive nature of Bojack's internal monologue. So, now that I've destroyed the notion of profanity censorship in Japanese subtitles with facts and logic, let's move on to some political censorship.
Daddy, do you want to meet my imaginary friend?
Imaginary friends are freeloaders invented by communists to rip off welfare.
Okay, I love this line. It's basically a parody of the tough-minded, paranoid, right-wing dad that many millennials and young Gen Xers had to deal with. If you're watching, hi, Dad! It's neoliberal, it's Red Scare, it's delicious boomer word salad. So let's see how this line was subtitled.
Daddy, do you want to meet my imaginary friend?
Imaginary friends are freeloaders invented by communists to rip off welfare.
Literally translated, this subtitle is, "Imaginary friends are jerks who advocate for the existence of commies." Definitely not as punchy or as funny as the original English, but that's partly because of my literal translation. If I were to translate this line with function in mind, it would be something more like, "Imaginary friends are commie-loving bastards." We lost the rip-off welfare part of the sentence, but again, looking at function, what's most important about this line is that it be humorous, reactionary Red Scare word salad. If you look at the dub version, it's not much different.
パパ、僕の想像のお友達に会いたい。
想像の友達ってのは共産主義者どもがいると主張する貧困者のことだ。
Since dubbing allows for more words than subs, aka, or commies, could be changed to the more explicit kyosan shugisha, communists, and yatsu, a catch-all sort of insult meaning jerk, cad, bastard, etc., could be changed to hinkongsha, which means paupers or impoverished people. This brings back the rip-off welfare part of the original English line, and if I were to translate this dub line with function in mind rather than form, it would probably be something like, "Imaginary friends are just a bunch of dirty poors who love communism." Again, if you're watching this, hi, Dad! And now let me remind you of this little gem we started the video with.
Todd clearly thinks the world of you.
Todd thinks the world of Pop-Tarts.
As I explained earlier, this insertion of a homophobic joke where there was none in the original English was most likely not for the purposes of pushing an agenda, but rather to be funny. Part of why it's funny is the word kei, respect, was changed to a very similar sounding gay-i, gay love. Which brings me to part 4. Pun, 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 pun. So today, as in Wednesday, April 27th, the day before I make this video public, I learned that Wes Robertson already wrote about the puns and wordplay in Bojack Horseman over on his blog. So any similarities are purely coincidental, truly. Also, I've linked his blog in the video description so you can check it out for yourself.
Horsing Around is filmed before a live studio audience.
Horsin' Around, the 90s sitcom from Bojack's glory days, is called baka sawagi, which means stupid fuss, horseplay, or foolin' around in Japanese. This is a lucky pun that actually works in both languages, since one of the kanji used in the word baka, or stupid, is the kanji for horse. A lot of the humor in Horsin' Around and in Bojack Horseman overall is in puns and wordplay, which are some of the most difficult things to translate in entertainment. In the glory days of anime fansubbing, the translators would usually leave the words in Japanese and put translator notes on the screen to explain that it was originally a pun in Japanese. And while sometimes that really is the only option that makes sense, whenever possible, you always want to keep the puns intact. The whole point of a pun is to be silly, funny, or to be the cause of a misunderstanding, which usually has funny or silly results. If you translate the words literally and lose the pun, you're doing a huge disservice to the original work of entertainment. Here's a scene from Horsin' Around. Pay attention to the pun.
Mondays.
Well, good morning to you, too.
Oh, hey.
Where? I love hay.
In both the sub and the dub, the line, "oh, hey," was translated as kusa suru, which literally means I feel depressed. Now, if you isolated just that line, you'd think, wow, what a horrible mistranslation. But if you looked at the next line, "where, I love hay," you'd see that Sabrina's monotone greeting of, "oh, hey," was actually a setup for Bojack's pun. Translated literally into Japanese, that exchange does not work. It would be like if Sabrina said, "oh, morning," and Bojack responded with, "where? I love hay!" Total word salad. And not the funny kind, like talking about commies on welfare. By instead working backwards from the punchline about hay and finding a Japanese word that sounds like kusa but means something different, the translator was able to keep this pun intact.
くさくさする。
どこ？草は大好き。
Here's another horse pun from episode 4, where Bojack is remembering his days doing stand-up.
And he says, why the long face? And I say, hey, buddy, I can't help it.
In the original English language version, the pun works because the phrase long face can mean either a face that is literally long in shape, or it can mean someone who looks sad. Japanese doesn't have this, though. Nagai tsura does not simultaneously mean a face that is long and a depressed face. But Japanese does have the word umaku, which means well-made or well-done, and which also sounds like uma, the Japanese word for horse. So instead of a long face, Bojack says he has an umaku dekita tsura, or a well-constructed face, which could also mean a horse-like face.
そいつがさ、うまくできた面だなって感心するんだよ。で答えた。馬面よさって。
And here's a Princess Caroline monologue that was a nightmare to transcribe by ear, by the way. Support me on Patreon! Where she's talking about a movie pitch that contains a lot of wordplay.
In Courts Me If You Can, the 1940s Cannes, France set story of a can-can dancer who contracts cancer but continues to can-can as a canny cadaver.
The original English monologue did a lot of wordplay around the word can-can, with words like can, as in the ability to do something, cancer, Cannes, as in the Cannes Film Festival, canny, as in shrewd, and a lot of other words that go well with can, like corpse, continues, cadaver, and the string of celebrity names beginning with the hard K sound.
Who plays the accordion with Kevin Corrigan, Kevin Kline, Chris Pine, and Chris Kattan.
Got it.
Since the entire purpose of this was to have a lot of alliteration and wordplay, the Japanese version had to start with their word for can and riff off of that with Japanese words or borrowed words used in Japanese that go with it. Luckily, a lot of these pun words are identical in both languages. Can, and cancer all sound quite similar in Japanese. The most notable addition in the sub was gakki o gangang hiku, where the onomatopoeia gangang, which means to pound, sounds very close to kan, the Japanese for can. A notable addition to the dub that I really liked was gan ni natte mo ganbatte, where the two gun sounds imitate can.
新レミ冬カンカンは1940年代のフランスカンヌが舞台よ。カンカンダンスのダンサーがガンになっても頑張って死ぬまでカンカンダンスを踊り続けるの。
Cancer is funny, yay! I have no transition, so let's just go into Part 5, How Emotions, Characters, and Relationships Translate.
Halloween costumes are a gateway to casual racism.
Why don't I keep the knife, Zobo?
Who's that dog?
So this section goes into the finer nuances of language, how little word choices here and there can do a lot to express a character's personality and emotions. This is all rather difficult to explain to people who have a limited understanding of Japanese, so I'm going to try to keep it simple. Let's look at some conversations between Diane and Bojack from episode 5.
Hey, so listen, I really want to be here for you in your time of need, but I'm not really good with funerals or death or families or feelings or people.
Don't worry. You can wait in the car.
In both the sub and the dub, you may notice that Japanese Bojack uses the kimi pronoun to address Diane.
君に力を貸したいのは山々だけど、葬式とか家族とかそういうの俺苦手なんだよね。
This already does a lot to show how he perceives the relationship, since kimi is a way of expressing that you are perhaps higher in status than the person you're addressing, but that you may think fondly of this person, or it can also be condescending. Think of all the nuances calling someone sweetie or dear can have in English, and that's kind of what kimi is like. Bojack uses the ore pronoun for himself, which is for masculine people. However, in the subs you'll see it's written in katakana instead of kanji, and this implies that Bojack is forcing the ore pronoun in an attempt to sound more masculine. A little later in the conversation, he says,
Life as an only child can get pretty lonely.
In the Japanese, he finishes his sentence with daze, which is another way of forcing your speech to sound more masculine. With just these two minor details, the Japanese version translates not only Bojack's words, but his masculine insecurity as well. Meanwhile, Japanese Diane is more feminine and a bit young-sounding.
Yeah, well, I was pretty lonely too.
そうね。私もすっごく寂しかったわよ。
Both sub and dub give her the feminine wa particle at the ends of her sentences from time to time, with the even more feminine wayo in the dub. And by changing the adjective sugoku to sugoku, Diane has a bit more of a casual, slangy tone to her speech. And lastly, just because he's a main character and I haven't used any clips with him yet, let's look at how Mr. Peanut Butter speaks Japanese.
What's that old expression? Fool me once, shame on me, but fool me twice, fiddle-dee-dee.
I do believe that is the expression.
Worth noting here that the sub changed the saying into a Japanese one. Kiku wa ichiji no haji, kikanu wa issho no haji. That's really awkward to say because the phrasing is really weird in Japanese. There are several different translations of this saying, but I personally like, he who asks a question is a fool for a minute, he who does not remains a fool forever. It means something completely different from the English saying Mr. Peanut Butter was trying to say, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And I mean, how dare that Japanese subtitler erase US American culture with that globalist woke translation, right? No, in all seriousness, it's better to choose a saying that actually exists in the language you're translating into. And the whole point of that line was to show that Mr. Peanut Butter is dumb and doesn't remember famous sayings properly. Kinda like my girl, I know Minako. But in the dub, you'll notice that since there was more time, the saying was actually translated into Japanese.
なんて言ったっけな。一度だけなら騙される方の恥でも二度目はラッタッタって。
ああ、そうだな。そんな感じだったかも。
And in both sub and dub, Mr. Peanut Butter finished the saying with ratata instead of fiddle-dee-dee. I looked up ratata, and it's actually from a 1976 commercial for the Honda Express scooter. Japanese culture doesn't have fiddle-dee-dee like we do in the West.
Fiddle-dee-dee.
Fiddle-dee-dee.
Fiddle-dee-dee, fiddle-dee-dee.
So this replacement works well in Japanese. Also, da-ta-ta rhymes with the wa part of the Japanese line, and fiddle-dee-dee rhymes with shame on me, the part that's supposed to end that saying in English. While these points also fall into my earlier section on wordplay, they do belong here too, since the main objective in this little joke was to show that Mr. Peanut Butter is A, dumb, and B, goofy and playful. This is why intersectionality is important, kids! This would not have been achieved if the lines had been translated literally. The Japanese audience would just be confused because they would lack the cultural context for that joke, just like we would have been just as confused by a 1976 Japanese commercial reference. Here's another sample of Japanese Mr. Peanut Butter.
Diane, do you know what today is?
Sunday?
It's burritos as big as your head day at El Taco Loco! We gotta go right now! なんだって? Diane! 今日は何の日だ?
日曜日?
なんとタコロコでブリトーをこんなにでっかくしてくれる日だよ! 言っとかないと!
Mr. Peanut Butter is the personification of a dog. As such, he's very excitable and childish, with exclamations like "Nandatte? Nanto? And ittokanaito!" Mr. Peanut Butter's energetic excitement comes across really well. These are the sorts of phrases you'll hear an excited announcer say if you watch enough Japanese commercials. Nanto! And the way he ends his sentences in da and dayo brings out his childish spirit as well. Well, this video wound up taking way longer to make than I thought it would. I know my audience here is of mixed levels. There are some fluent in Japanese, some are beginning to intermediate level, and some of you probably don't know a word of Japanese, and I hope this video wasn't confusing to you. Really, what I wanted to do here was to take a different approach in showing how entertainment translation works. I can yell until I'm blue in the face that anime subs should not be literal, that suffixes like chan, san, and senpai should not always be left in, and that fangirling can be a perfectly acceptable translation of moe. But the biases many anime fans have from years of watching their anime subbed a certain way often prevents my message from reaching them. And I get it. If you're used to something being a certain way, it's hard to accept any changes to it. And one of the reasons many anime fans find anime so appealing in the first place is because of those little Japaneseisms and literal moments. They think it's neat that they're watching something in another language, and they really want to be reminded of the fact that it's in Japanese and that it's different. But when Japanese people watch anime, the last thing they're thinking is, wow, this anime is so Japanese! Just listen to how very Japanese it is! No, they're just enjoying a story, connecting with characters, feeling emotions. My hope is that US Americans and other native English speakers can someday learn to appreciate anime and drama series like Squid Game not as foreign entertainment, but as simply entertainment. That's not to say that I think we should overly Americanize Netflix dramas like Squid Game or anime masterpieces like Oreimo, but rather that we all as viewers can let go of our preconceived ideas of what a South Korean drama or a Japanese anime or a cartoon about a horse should be like. Ooh-wee, so this video was a bit different. Anyway, I'm probably not going to be uploading on this channel for a little while. I have a really busy translating summer, and I also am working in the background on a really big video essay that requires research and stuff. So go back and watch some of my older videos or something. I have a lot of old videos. Or you can also check out my sister channel, Sarah Moon Japanese, if you want to learn more about Japanese. Thank you to my patrons, especially Greg, Lay, Henry Roaming, Data Fox, and Charpixie.